everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of Behind the Sounds. I'm super excited to be joined by the wonderful Caitlyn Smith today. Hello, thank you so much for being
Hello.
here.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
It's been great. And I know you have been here, there, and everywhere recently. I know you've been touring and you've taken the RV out on the road. How has it been just kind of being out again and being around and touring?
Man, it is both so wonderful being able to be back doing what I absolutely love. Um and also so exhausting. I feel like I talk to a lot of my friends, we feel this way like, for a couple years we just were chill, making gardens, like there wasn't a very heavy social schedule. And I think I know I for sure kind of hit warp speed when life opened back up again. And so it feels very good, but also like a bit like a blender.
And I love the way you've done it because you did like an RV tour, right? So you kind of packed up and were like, I'm going to make this a bit of a road trip as well as a work trip. How was that to kind of put it all together?
It was amazing. I've got two little kids, a 6-year old and an almost 4-year old, two boys, and we love to bring them on the road. And we've done a handful of tours kind of on our East Coast, and cities are a lot closer together. And right now we're traveling in a van, in a Sprinter van. And so with kids, it's extra, right? It's already wild enough to pile in a van with a bunch of stinky musician dudes. But to add kids on that is, it adds to the circus. And so when I found out we were going to do the tour on the West Coast, cities are a lot more spaced out. It's a lot of mountains, a lot of beautiful national parks. I knew I wanted to have a little bit more space, and plus I wanted to take some time to see the magic. And so we decided to rent an RV. We slept in the RV like most of the nights, which was crazy. The kids loved it. I loved it. I grew up camping, and so it brought back a lot of those childhood memories, which I think of very fondly. So it was fun, but it was an adventure. RVs, I don't know if you know, they actually they stink a little bit if it gets really, really hot. So yeah, that was extra stinky too.
I mean, but it's so worth it for the views and the music and all that.
It was amazing, and to be able to like I love that part of the country. But it was amazing because, with two little kids, I was like, well, how are we going to keep them entertained on, we've got a 9-hour drive, we got a 8-hour drive. And they would spend hours just staring out the window and watching the scenery roll by. And it would just, in a world that's so fast paced, and kids these days, their attention spans are getting shorter and shorter, right? It was amazing to just watch them like take in nature and be entertained by that.
I absolutely love that. It sounds dreamy. And
Yeah.
talking of childhoods, it's somewhere where I always love to start when we start this podcast and we talk about the music because we all get so much influence from our childhood. So, obviously, you said you were going camping and things. What was your childhood like, musical wise? Did you have a
Yeah.
in your life?
Yeah, totally. Um, there was always music um, on in my house. My dad constantly had the radio on in his garage, and if it wasn't, if we weren't in the garage listening to music, it was on in our house. My mom played a little bit of piano. My dad played a little bit of guitar, but they weren't musicians really. Um, and I started, you know, singing in church. I grew up in singing the old hymns, and um, it was somewhere where I just kind of became enamored with the harmonies and melodies and singing. And it also gave me a way to just try singing in a very forgiving spot very early, which was really exciting. And then as I got older, I started really diving into country music, um, and started singing at little fairs and festivals and things around my tiny hometown. And so early on, I developed an incredible passion for singing, but also performing as well.
Yeah, and I think, is it one of them things that when you grow up around so much music and you're constantly in it, did you always kind of just feel very natural in that? It kind of was a natural progression to be like, oh, I'm gonna sing, and obviously you could. So did it feel quite easy to move into that kind of performing side of things?
Yeah, it felt really natural. I think um, my parents, they'd my mom would sit down on the piano and we would sing show tunes together or country songs, and as she would play and I would sing, and I think they recognized like, oh, your pitch is really great, like at a young age. And so, and they had a couple people mention to them like, that's not normal, like the way that she's singing as a kid. And so I think I was 7 years old when they put me in voice lessons, and I learned how to sing classically and breathe right. And so like when you're starting that young and continuing to get affirmation from all the adults around you, um, I think it was exciting for me as a kid. I was like, wow, okay, I'm good at this. This is so cool. It was very apparent that I wasn't good at sports or t-ball and things like that. Like, wasn't getting the affirmation there.
Yeah.
And so I think, yeah, just kind of being around that developed this like, wow, I love doing this, but also like it makes people happy when I
Yeah.
sing.
It
So
really does, and it's one of them things, as you say, it brings people together and people notice and picking that up. Was there then a time where I suppose when possibly when you were a bit older, where you were like, okay, actually, this is something I know I'm good at because people are telling me, so maybe I'll do it for a living? Is there kind of a
yeah,
time in your life where you realized that that switch kind of flipped and you were like, okay, I can possibly do this?
for sure. I mean, it started happening early. I remember being in middle school, and I had started writing songs too at a pretty young age. I think I was 8 or 9 when I just started making stuff up and trying to write my own music. So by the time I was in middle school, I had a bunch of original songs, and I put together a little band with some of my friends in school. My brother played drums, and I was, like cold calling coffee shops and venues and trying to get them to book our band. And I wanted to do it as a kid in high school. And so as I was doing that as a middle schooler, I think my parents saw the diligence, they saw the passion, um, and they sat me down when I was about 15 years old, and they said, well, we notice you really love this. You're making some money, which is really cool, but everybody keeps asking for music. What do you think about making your first album?
Hmm.
We will help you out. And so they gave me a loan. It was understood that I was like, this was my school. It was like my college fund. And they're like, here it is, but you have to pay it back. We're not going to give you money. And so it was an incredible way as a teenager to learn how to own my own business, to learn how to recoup, and just I mean, to do every piece of it. So booking, being my own roadie,
Yeah.
being my own promo person, like all of those, I was wearing all of those hats as a kid. But what a great way to learn the music business.
Yeah, and that's often I love talking to people who kind of, go into this career and don't actually realize that there's so many different hats to wear and there's so many different things you have to do. Do you think, like looking back, it's really helped you now when other people are doing that for you to maybe kind of communicate and understand each other more because you've done it yourself?
Absolutely. It creates a great deal of understanding and empathy, for whatever role it might be, from selling merch to actually booking the shows. Like I've done it independently, so I know that it's not easy. And so definitely there's like a level of understanding and respect that I have for all of it, which I think it's good. It's good to have that.
Yeah, I think it's so great. And at what point, obviously you say you grew up and you really got into a lot of country music. Did you always know that you were probably going to head to Nashville? Was it the obvious thing to do?
I figured that out in sometime in high school, and I took my first trip to Nashville because I heard that's where you go if you want to do music. Um, and when I got there, I fell in love with Music City, but I also discovered that it's Songwriter City, and that there's a whole industry of songwriters that are paying the bills and making money by just writing for other people. And it was around there where I found out, well, I don't necessarily know how my artist path is gonna go, how it's gonna happen. This seems like a really good backup plan to just like craft songs and write them for other people. And so I made my way to Nashville and took dozens and dozens of trips back and forth from my hometown to Music City, to write with people, to get to know people, and to eventually land a publishing deal as well. And so um, I didn't like, I think it was on that first trip where I realized I think this is where I need to be. But it took me about 5 or 6 years to finally move there.
I love that. And I love that you kind of went with the songwriting as a backup plan, because it ended up in, initially being a huge success for you. You've written some massive hits and still are, obviously, for yourself as well. How long, obviously you say 5 or 6 years to actually move, but how long did it take since when you officially moved to kind of feel like you'd actually made it as a songwriter? Because it seems, if you look at like your writing credits, it seems like it happened so quickly. And
So,
things came in, and you wrote for some big massive names, Jason Aldean, Cassie Pope, Rascal Flatts, in short succession. And then you had some bigger hits, which we'll talk about in more detail. But was there a time kind of early on where you were like, oh yeah, actually this backup plan is pretty good, it's working?
um, I think the moment that I signed my publishing deal and I was like, someone is paying me in advance, really, but
Mm-hmm.
someone's paying me to write songs, like that, I think it comes in waves. It comes in chunks, right? Of that feeling of validation. So that was the first one. Getting that first cut, that first call that Jason Aldean was recording one of my songs, like that's another step of like, oh my gosh, like I'm really doing this. But it's very interesting. And I think that every industry has this scenario it's called the hedonic treadmill. I don't know if you've heard of this,
Yeah.
but what it is basically you have your goals and your dreams. So I packed up my little car and moved on to Nashville with all my hopes and dreams too. But what's crazy is like, okay, you reach those dreams that you had right when you first moved, and then the bar just keeps getting higher, and the bar keeps getting higher, and it keeps. And so I've noticed that happening with everybody in Nashville too. It's like, so it's hard because you're like, okay, I've got this cut, but I don't have the single. Okay, I've actually never had a number one in country music. And so that's like, for me, oh wow, have I really made like. And so it's hard, to you have to take every tiny success along the way and choose to celebrate it, because otherwise you're just going to be chasing the thing. And so, to answer your question, like, do I feel like I've made it? Like, um on some days, yes. And on some days, like, I'm like, okay, I've got to get that next thing and that next thing. So I try and stay present and grateful for the things that have already happened, if that makes sense.
It makes so much sense. And the treadmill is, yeah, I'm a fan, but also a foe of the treadmill. It makes so much sense, and it is, I
I
think,
know.
all aspects and all aspects of life. We focus on that a lot. So I love that you talk about that. We do. I can't, it's a songwriting podcast. I can't let you on and not talk about this song, because, and I know it's something you play when you're on tour and you talk about it a lot, but possibly if you're going to write a song for anyone in country music, Dolly Parton and Kenny Rogers are going to be up there with the people you want to write for. And you got to write a duet for them. Can you just, in a nutshell, tell us a little bit about that song and that experience for you?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, every time someone even mentions it or bring it up, it gives me chills still. I can't wrap my head around that still really happened. um, and I'm forever, forever grateful for it. But the story of this song uh, begins with my songwriter hero and mentor, Don Schlitz. When I first moved to town, he really took me under his wing and taught me so much about songwriting. And we have written dozens and dozens of songs together. And on one day when arrived at his house. He had just the week before been inducted in the Songwriter Hall of Fame. And Don has written songs for Kenny Rogers. He's written The Gambler. He's written some of my favorites, like Forever and Ever Amen, or When You Say Nothing at All. Some of my favorite songs. And so, anyways, he was inducted in the Hall of Fame. Kenny Rogers was there presenting and pulled him aside and said, Don, I've got this song title. Will you please write this for me? So we told him the title. And then the next week, Don and I were writing, and he had saved the idea for me, which I was so grateful for. So we sat down and we wrote this little title called You Can't Make Old Friends. Him and I have just this very beautiful way of writing where he's like this brilliant lyricist. He just sits at his computer and like creates this magic, and I try and figure out, okay, how do we sing that magic? And so the song was written so quickly. We emailed it to Kenny Rogers, and then we didn't hear anything. A month goes by, 2 months go by, like 6 months go by, nothing. And so we're like, oh, I guess he didn't like it. I don't know. But I do remember it was on April Fool's Day, the joke day of the year, where everyone pulls pranks on each other. I'm sitting having breakfast with my publisher, and he says to me, did you hear about the Kenny Rogers song? I was like, what are you talking about? He was like, well, he's pulling Dolly Parton on the song. And I just remember being like, if this is an April Fool's joke, I am leaving town. This is not like, of all the days you could tell me. And, to celebrate the 30 years since they had released Islands in the Stream, they wanted to duet one last time, and they decided to record our song. And so it's the most magical thing that's ever happened to me in my life. I feel like it's all downhill from here. I'm forever grateful. But I cry every time I hear that song. Every time.
It is, and I know. I mean, when I got to see you last year at Country to Country, and you played in London, and you sang it, and I think it's one of them things where, what a thing to say you've done, but also not just a duet, but that whole 30 years, and it was their last duet, and so many amazing things that come with that. Going like forward after that, did you feel things had changed for you? Because they're like the biggest names in all of country music. did it change anything for you in terms of kind of who you were in rooms with, or was that all already kind of quite settled?
Yeah, I feel like, I don't know if that song really bumped things, but it's hard for me to assess that. Because I was writing with everyone in town and finding my group of people. And so I think, I don't know if that was it or what it was. Because I think it was around then too, where I started really missing the stage and missing performing my own music and really wanting to start making my own albums. And so, I mean, the whole thing was constantly shifting. So I don't know.
Yeah, no, I completely get that, and I think it's so interesting to recognize it from that perspective, where actually you're like, I don't really know what did what, and it's just, it all happened. I do want to talk so much about your own music, but there's another duet, and I'm so intrigued by the story of how this happened, in that you wrote one of the biggest pop duets in the last 10 years, the last decade, which is was John Legend and Meghan Trainor, Like I'm Gonna Lose You. And I think maybe from a fan perspective, it was quite an unexpected hit. It was kind of this duet that kind of, got released and didn't have too much, and then all of a sudden blew up and was massive. I know you wrote that and co-wrote it with Meghan, but again, how did that happen? Because you're in Nashville, you're writing all these country hits, you're working on your own music, and then out of the blue pulls out this massive pop hit.
Right. Well, I mean, I chalk this all up to Meghan. I remember when she came to town, and I started hearing people started passing around her demos. They're like, listen to this, she's amazing. And I remember my publisher was listening to one of her songs in his office, and I popped in and I was like, who is that? And then he's like, that's that Meghan girl. And I was like, please, like, please get me with her. And so I remember we sat down. She had just signed her publishing deal, and she's like, I don't know if I want to be an artist. She's like she's like, I don't know, I got a little too many LBs to be an artist. Like, she was talking about that, which is funny. That ended up being her first single. Like,
Yeah.
I was like, girl, whatever. Like, and I just remember like how magical she is, and she was on that day that we wrote. She picked up a ukulele, and we couldn't really figure out what to write about. We were just going to write a song like to pitch to like Kelly Clarkson or something. We just were like, let's just make something up. I don't know. And so, I remember she had mentioned having a bad dream about losing her brother or something. And then, the conversation went to like our other co-writer, Justin Weaver, who, there's this other scenario where they had lost someone in their life. And so we just were talking about life and loss and the fragility of this journey that we're on, right? And then this beautiful song it came out of it. On the demo, like, Meghan plays ukulele, I'm singing the demo, and it's like actually a little more reggae the way we wrote it, which is crazy.
Yeah, wow.
And so then we fast forward like a couple years. The song just sat there, and a couple years later, she starts working on her own artist stuff, writes all about that bass to pitch, and she sits down with I can't remember who it was, the head of some record label, and they're like, no, this is your song, we're signing you. So anyways, long story short is, she pulled together a record, and that song kind of floated to the top. They reworked it as the 6/8 jam that it is. Yeah. Produced it with a guy named Chris Galbuta in East Nashville, and I am so very grateful for that little song. It was very unexpected.
Yeah.
But it became my first number one, which is nuts.
It's so great, and it's that story again of you writing a song, and then there's kind of this period of time where you're like, nothing's happening with it. And I always find whenever I talk to people about kind of big hits, that's always the case. And they're always like, oh yeah, we don't hear anything for a while. And again, did that kind of make you think, oh, I could write more outside of country, or were you always still like, oh, I'm gonna stick with my vibe? Because your own music definitely, I personally think, kind of, merges different genres, which is so great. But did that kind of inspire you to branch out a little bit more?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely was already doing the branching out, and I think in that time a lot of LA was coming to Nashville, starting to come to Nashville, and my publisher was putting me in those rooms, and it was just because I think melody wise, like, I can lean into country, I can lean into pop, I can kind of go anywhere. And so it made sense. And so I think that once that song hit, I was definitely pushing even more into pop, but I think it was already happening in Nashville while we were writing that song.
I agree. And I think nowadays as well, it's so hard to kind of define a genre because, as you say, everyone is, LA's coming to Nashville, Nashville's going to LA. It's everyone's kind of merging and dipping in and out. And it's so hard to kind of be like, this is that, because there are so many elements to it. Have you found that as well, kind of with writing and being your own artist?
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like, I mean, music is constantly shifting and constantly changing. Even in the country music genre, what was on the radio when I first moved to Nashville versus what's on the radio now, versus what's winning awards. Like, it's all constantly shifting. I do feel like there's more of a pop element that's seeping into country music, but I also feel like it goes the other way, and that a lot of the pop music is becoming more specific, more stories, like, and so it used to be like pop was just like a basic emotion, a simple lyric, very repetitive, and country music is where the stories lived, right? But I feel like it's all kind of starting to
entangle
together.
It is, and for the best. I think it's been so great, and I think I've listened to probably more pop music in the last 5 years than I have in the last 20 years, because it is becoming more more interesting. you know, there's more to it, and
Yeah,
it
for
is so
sure, for
great.
sure.
So I love that you see that too as an artist and a writer. And then, so finally, talking of artistry, I'm gonna start with your first full length album, because there is just something about your albums that I think just kind of pierce your heart. It is um, there's so much storytelling and so much emotion to them. But going back 2018, I think it was Starfire, you finally got to release a full length record of your own. Can you tell me a little bit just about that whole experience of having your own album out there?
Yeah, it was such an incredible journey creating that record. I mean, going back even a few years before that, and talking about my journey even to that record, you know, I had realized in the writing room I was missing the stage, I was missing, you know, singing my own music, and I had went around to every record label in Nashville and heard no, but that's a great song. Can I put it on this artist that we just signed over here? Like constantly. And it was, you know, it was so many no's and so many closed doors. And it finally led me to a place where I said, you know what? I'm just gonna make my own record that I love. I'm not gonna think about radio. I'm not gonna think about anything except putting songs on it that I connect with. And so I went in. I met this wonderful producer, Paul Moak, um, and we made just this magical little record. And it was so much fun to kind of tune out the voices and just create. And it was even more fun to put it out there in the world and have people actually care about it. I was like, wow, this is insane. um, and be able to connect with the songs, and I mean, the whole journey was absolutely magical. So
It's so great, and I think I love, obviously the title being Starfire, and you talking about it being magical and a journey was so great. And I am going to skip forward a little bit because I really want to delve into your second album slightly, which came out at the beginning of 2020, Supernova. And I promise I don't say this to everyone. One of my all-time favorite albums, and I remember it being released
oh my gosh,
in
thank
or
you.
around, it was weeks apart from Nightfall, Little Big Town's Nightfall, and I remember just having that and Nightfall on repeat for weeks and weeks and weeks. Um, I can
I
imagine
love that Nightfall record too.
it's
Oh
so great,
man.
and I think there was so much kind of mirroring between the two records, in the sense of they were kind of quite moody and dramatic, but with so much kind of heart. And I can imagine there was so much planning into that record being released. You'd had so much traction. It was a really kind of highly anticipated second record, and then everything shuts down and you can't do anything. Firstly, can you tell me a little bit about just the process and the kind of meaning behind Supernova? And then we'll talk about the rest of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, definitely. Um, well, yeah, I mean, everybody talks about how second records are so tricky, they're so hard. You're coming off of a, you know, your debut, and it's like, okay, now what? Now what do you say? Now where do you go? Um, and I had met a handful of collaborators in the journey of making Supernova, Leggy Landon being one of them, Jennifer DeSilvio, both of them in LA, that I really, really connected with. And Leggy had made a track of one of the songs we had written, and I really fell in love with his like very rich, like the rich production, the moodiness of it, the cinematicness of it.
Mm.
And I thought, man, this would be a really fun place to go with record number two. And so, you know, I recorded half of the album in LA and half of the album in Nashville. Um, and you know, I'm trying to go back and think. I had just toured um, Starfire a bunch, had another baby, and and so there was a lot of like holding the baby in the studio and writing these songs as well. Um, but I mean, I was really, really super excited about Supernova, super excited about the songs. I had a chance to write with some of my heroes on the record as well. Um, and so, like you said, like it was highly anticipated, and we had a big year plan, touring with Little Big Town, touring with Mary Morris. Like it was all of the things, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so when the record was released on March 13th, 2020, which was we were out on the road with Little Big Town, about to fly to New York City to do like all the big TV stuff, and we get the call, the tour is canceled, and I don't know what's going to happen, but you just have to drive home. And I just remember my husband and I like, whoo, this is nuts. But so there's all of this heart, all of this energy, right? 2 years spent into writing and recording this album. And to be met with like, oh man, all of these expectations and hopes, like for what putting this baby out into the world were just like the fire was put out, right?
Yeah.
Um, and it was I went through definitely a period of like mourning the album, of like mourning the kind of death of the dream of the album. And
Yeah.
we really might I feel grateful because my team really they did their best to pivot. We all did, right? Everybody tried to make the best of a really terrible situation. Um, but it took me a minute to finally just make peace of like, you know what? I'm not in control of any of this. And I just have to give it up to be like, whoever needs to find this album right now will find this album. And it just like, it taught me so many lessons of just letting things go. And as a control freak, that's very hard. It's a hard lesson I keep
Exactly.
learning. And, and
Yeah.
so, yeah, when I think of that album, I think of like, wow, the lesson of letting go.
Yeah, I mean, and so great, but what an album to do it with. And I love so, so much that, as you say, you had no control. And actually that saying of whoever will find this album will find it and whoever needs it. And I actually think for me personally, that was probably it because I think I found that record and it was on repeat and it was it was what I needed at that point. And I think so many other people will feel that way. Um, and yes, we all obviously lost a period of time to everything, but coming kind of out of it now, and you've got a new project out, which is so great, which we're going to talk about. Um, are you still kind of excited about going out and playing the songs that you kind of never really got to play?
Yes, it is exciting. Especially when I was in the UK in March for C2C, I realized I hadn't toured either one of these records, and these fans have lived with these albums and are still very excited like to hear them. And so it was that actually going over there and playing the old records really like even brought some life back into them for me. Um, but it was fun to go back out on the road and play some of Supernova, but it's hard because you're most excited about your most recent work.
Yeah.
So I didn't get to play the whole album and do
Mhm.
the whole thing justice, but we did some of it.
Yeah, I love that. And let's talk about the new project. It came out in April, which seems like it was so long ago, but actually also yesterday. The title track being High, which is a song that's been in the world for a few years now because it was recorded by Miley Cyrus, and then you have kind of been like, yeah, I wrote that, but actually, I'm going to release my own version of it, which is just impeccable. And I know recently, over the last kind of few weeks, you've done more acoustic versions, and it's been out again. Why did you decide to re-release and re-record that song as your own again?
Yes. Well, from the moment we wrote the song, I felt crazy connected to it. I was in love with it, right? And so when I wrote it, I knew like, well, this is the start of my next project for sure. Um, but then when we got the call that Miley had heard the song and Mark Ronson was going to produce it and she wanted to do it, like I was like, absolutely. Like it is truly the highest honor when another artist hears a song and loves it enough that they want to make it their own. And so I'm always like, yep, awesome, great. and I'll do the songwriter version over here on my record. Like, and I think people used to do it a lot more, where if there was a song that was like connecting, multiple artists would record it. It wouldn't stop people from putting it on the record if it had been even a hit on someone else. And so that's never really scared me from recording my own version of any of those songs.
Yeah, I love it. And you've made it into a project which has been so good. And is there kind of more to come with this kind of era? Are you allowed to tell us
Yes,
anything?
I'm so excited. So this album, when I created it, it was meant to exist as a whole record.
Yeah,
And so, but we decided to release it in pieces because even because the listening-ship, I think, of fans has changed. Consumers are not able to, they don't make time to sit down and listen to records like they used to. And so I decided we'll do a slow trickle of music. We'll start with high. And so the whole concept of high and low really came after I had written the song High, and then non-intentionally written a song called Low, that I really loved. And as I was piecing this album together, I was realizing that in the process of writing in the last few years, have really leaned into some more vulnerability. There were some songs on this next record that I'm a little bit afraid to put out, because they are just like my heart on my sleeve and some hard truths to say out loud. But I also realized, as a person, as an artist, I'm an Enneagram 3. I want people to just like me. And I am just always loving to just show the highlights, right? I want people to think I've got it all together. I'm so guilty of putting on a face, and I've had a season of life where I've realized why am I pretending? It's so silly. Not everyone is perfect. I'm not perfect, and it's just ridiculous to pretend and to try. And I also realized that in showing the lows and being honest about the struggle, um, that that's where vulnerability, like connection, comes in vulnerability. And so, really, high and low is my journey in learning how to be okay with the lows as well. And so I'm really, really looking forward to releasing the next chunk of this album.
I, for one, cannot wait. I think it's going to be so great. And I think that actually, possibly the pandemic has taught us that all these kind of, hidden aspects of life that we don't advertise as much, that actually they make the best
Yeah.
stories and the best songs and everything. So I'm super excited. I'm gonna wrap up very soon, but before I let you go, I have 3 questions that I ask everyone that comes on Behind the Sounds.
Awesome.
I'm gonna put you on the spot, so I apologize. And they're all around threes. But firstly, $1 million question. Can you name 3 songs that you wish you'd have written?
Oh my goodness. Um, I Will Always Love You. That's number one. To Make You Feel My Love, Bob Dylan, number 2. Oh, it's hard to only choose 3.
Um,
Um, I mean, I have to pick a Patty Griffin song. Probably Moses. Do you know that song?
Patty Griffin is, yeah, the queen. One of the many queens, but yes.
But I could pick like 10 Patty Griffin songs that I wish
Yeah,
I
I think for me it
would.
would be probably Blue Sky, but yeah, so
Oh,
many.
I love that. That
Yeah,
melody's insane.
so many. But yeah, so great. Okay, I don't know if it gets easier or harder, but what about 3 albums that you couldn't live without?
Oh, wow. Well, Patty Griffin, Living with Ghosts.
Yeah,
Um, Carole King's Tapestry. It's so hard to only pick 3. And albums too. Um, Paul Simon, Still Crazy After All These Years.
great choices. Great
It's
choices.
also hard to pick one Paul Simon record, but I love that album.
And then final kind of 3 question. Um, 3 artists or writers or producers or whomever's that you haven't yet worked with that are on your bucket list that you'd like to
Oh my
work with?
goodness. Adele. um, Writers or artists that I want to work. Oh, it is so tricky to narrow it down because I have a long list. I would love to sing something before I die with Chris Stapleton. That would be insane.
That I can see that definitely happening.
Oh, it would be amazing. Um, I'm trying to think of a songwriter. I mean, I really, really want to meet Dolly Parton. I've not yet met her. Um,
Okay.
and so I don't even have to write with her or anything, just to be in the room with her.
Yeah.
And that's on the bucket list for sure.
I love that. It's so great. And we are so excited because very shortly we're going to have you back in the UK
Can't
for
wait.
so many shows. So we are so excited, and I cannot wait to hear the rest of these songs and the next chapter. But I just want to thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much, Leah, for having me, and I can't wait to see you in next week. Woohoo!
In the flesh, it's happening.
I can't wait.